Thank you for tuning in to the Into the Classroom series produced by Mental Health California, sponsored by Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative.
Welcome to Into the Classroom, which is a student mental health awareness multimedia series produced by Mental Health California. Today's topic is youth and eating disorders, understanding the physical and mental health impacts that are related. I'm your host, Conrad Crump, also known as Coach Crump, and today we're going to be talking about how eating disorders can have a profound impact on young people and how it can affect their mental and physical well-being. Understanding the definitions, factors, and medical facts surrounding eating disorders is crucial for early indication and intervention. By addressing the underlying psychological aspects, promoting body positivity, and providing comprehensive support, we can help youth on their journey to recovery, fostering healthy relationships with food, body, and self. Remember, seeking help is actually a sign of strength, and recovery is possible. So let's get into our discussion. I'm pleased to welcome today our clinician, Mr. Christian Jacobs. Christian is a licensed marriage and family therapist and a leading Brother Be Well clinical advisor. Christian is a well-known therapist who also has expertise in substance use prevention, and his depth of knowledge benefits youth and their families throughout the entire state of California. Welcome, Christian. Now, I'd also like to introduce some of our youth guests. I'd like to introduce Sophia Toledo, who's a student at William J. P. Knight High School. Hey, Sophia, how's it going?
Good. How's it going?
Pretty good. We also have with us Erica Pham from Miraloma High School. Welcome, Erica.
Hi, Conrad. Thank you for having me.
Yes. And I'd also like to introduce Monica Tamayo from UCLA. Hey there, Monica.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Wonderful. And last but certainly not least, I'd like to introduce Michael Betlak from Sac State University. What's up, Michael? How's it going?
What's going on, Coach Crump?
All right. Well, a lot is going to be going on in this discussion because we are going to be talking about a real great topic that actually impacts a lot of young folks. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Christian for some brief clinical insights into eating disorders.
Sure, yeah, this is an excellent topic because it affects a lot of folks, young and old. And I just want to share that I think it's really important to point out how specialized the area of eating disorder treatment is. It's very specialized. It requires a therapist who's working with a therapist and doctors that's been training and treating these disorders, along with other folks. So not just anyone can help an individual has an eating disorder. It takes someone who's specialized in that area as a therapist. And also there's a lot of criteria. So like for all eating disorders, they're not the same for men as they are in women. So there's a lot of cultural challenges when it comes to eating disorders with men and women. With men, it's a lot more acceptable to have body image issues, and for women and girls, it's kind of seen as stigma in terms of how body image is portrayed. And also, just to talk a little bit briefly about what is eating disorder. Well, it's really feeling an extreme fear about the possibility of gaining weight, also like the restriction of energy intake and things of that sort. And it's also an intense fear of gaining weight too, or becoming fat or underweight. And it's also there's also types of things such as like body dysmorphia, meaning the way you see a certain part of your body. I want to emphasize that it's a disturbance in terms of seeing a certain part of your body. So if you're always focusing on your stomach, like, oh my God, your whole body you can be thin, but you're looking at this little piece of fat on your stomach. That's how body dysmorphia is. You're focused on one part of your body. You know, I just want to emphasize that. And then also, so anorexia it kind of falls in that as well when you fall under a certain body weight. And bulimia, it looks a little different. You know, that's when you're eating a certain amount of time, and then in that food you're regurgitating it or throwing it up after a certain amount of time. So that's just the basics of bulimia, anorexia, and body dysmorphia.
Wow, yeah, thanks a lot for that, Christian. That's some great insight. You know, especially the piece about specific body parts. You know, I know as of late, you know, folks really are focused on image, and especially with social media and so on and so forth, how they look is a big deal. So people might, you know, look at certain parts of their body, like their arms or their, you know, chin or neck area or their hips or whatnot. So all of these are different things that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. But right now, I'd actually like to ask some of our youth, just by a show of hands, has anyone here, you yourself, had experience with or know someone who has experienced an eating disorder? Okay. Now I see Erica's hand has gone up. Erica, would you care to elaborate just a little bit on what that experience was like for that person or what you observed?
Yeah, I've definitely known some friends who have gone through eating disorders, and it's kind of hard because um I'm, as a friend, not sure how much to like help them or how much to like give my input on it because I don't necessarily know what they're going through. But just trying to keep that like safe environment around them and trying to like reassure them, I think that helps when you know somebody who has an eating disorder, or just when you don't know if somebody has one and you're kind of thinking of them, just try to like keep it like sensitive and all that. But yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for that feedback. You know, just trying to be there, trying to show support, that's huge and super important. So let's go a little further into our conversation on youth and eating disorders, and as we understand the physical and mental health impacts that are related. And let's look at our slide presentation. So when it comes to eating disorders, you know, and Christian kind of talked about this body image distortion. You know, this is when a person has a distorted perception of their own body, where they may see themselves as overweight or unattractive, even when they're underweight or at a healthy weight. You know, this is something that's really something that's involved with a person's the way in which they see themselves. This distorted body image actually can contribute to low self-esteem and also just an overall negative self-image of their own individual self. Let's go ahead and move along. Now, surprisingly, many people are impacted by eating disorders. Eating disorders can affect individuals of any age, any gender, any background. They're actually mostly diagnosed during adolescence and early adulthood, and research has shown that eating disorders actually among young males is on the rise as well. Now let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. Now, according to the National Eating Disorders Association, also known as NEDA, approximately 20 million women and 10 million men in the United States will experience an eating disorder at some point in their lives. And looking at the slide, we see that 95% of those who have eating disorders are between the ages of 12 and 25. You know, so we also understand that eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness, with anorexia nervosa having the highest mortality rate among all psychiatric disorders. Now, when we go into the definition of defining major eating disorders, how do we define these eating disorders? Well, anorexia nervosa, which Christian mentioned earlier, is characterized by an intense fear of gaining weight. It can lead to severe food restriction and a distorted body image of the individual, who will really restrict themselves from eating food, you know, hold back on meals, and just really mentally think of themselves in a distorted way. Individuals with anorexia also often have a significantly lower body weight, and they also often engage in excessive exercise. And, you know, with these behaviors, these are also exhibited as obsessive behaviors that's related to their food and their weight control. Moving on to the next slide, we have bulimia nervosa. Now, bulimia, on the other hand, which Christian mentioned earlier, involves recurrent episodes of binge eating. And, it's when a person will really just eat a bunch of food and then self-induce the vomiting. Also, they are engaged in excessive exercise or even the misuse of laxatives or diuretics. Individuals with bulimia often experience a sense of loss of control during their binge episodes, and they have a preoccupation with body shape and weight. Frequent purging behaviors in bulimia can actually cause physical damage to the individual, including their esophagus, their teeth, salivary glands, and more. So certainly something to be aware of. Now, the next disorder we want to talk about, BED, also known as binge eating disorder. Now, this is characterized by recurrent episodes of consuming large amounts of food in a short period of time and having a feeling of a loss of control. Now, unlike bulimia, individuals with BED do not engage in the compensatory behaviors. BED is often associated with feelings of guilt, shame, and distress. Now, this binge eating can lead to gastrointestinal distress, such as bloating, constipation, and stomach pain. Now, let's move along and talk a little bit about anxiety and depression. Now, eating disorders often coexist with anxiety disorders and depression. The constant preoccupation with food, weight, and body image, along with the social and emotional consequences, can lead to heightened anxiety and feelings of sadness and hopelessness. Now, I wanted to kind of pivot to you, Christian, and want to ask if we can talk a little bit more about that. This connection between the eating disorder and the anxiety and depression, and what that may look like, and the impacts it can have on our young folks.
Yeah, just to share a couple of numbers with you all, this would kind of lead into why so much anxiety is connected. Among normal weight, right, 46% of teens view themselves as too heavy. That's more than half, right? And you have 60% of female teens and young adults diet regularly. So it's a regular occurrence of dieting. And then you look at female teens and also some men too, but this really affects females more. Smoke cigarettes and alcohol to control the weight, because nicotine is an appetite depressant. And so when you look at these things, and then you also see the teens are more preoccupied with their food intake, and for men, you're looking at most men tend to be more focused on achieving the muscular physique, right? So all these pressures can really cause a level of anxiety, and that could be social norms to keep up with what they see, or even if they have a friend that looks a certain way. So you combine, these pressures to really stay on top of how you want to look, on top of the stress of actually being bulimic or having these conditions. It's really hard to do.
Wow, thanks a lot for that, Christian. That's so true. I don't really think about it, but for folks who are in that situation, having to strategically plan out or think about how they can maneuver around certain social situations or social settings can truly, be a huge challenge and just a task in and of itself. So certainly something to raise awareness about, and support our young folks that may be going through that. And with that, we've got our young folks here, and I'm thinking about social media, and I'm thinking about image, and I just kind of want to ask, with regard to the way in which folks are viewed and how social media plays a big role in that, why might you think a young person may engage in some of these behaviors as it relates to their own image? And I'll ask you, Monica, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So I think it's because on social media there's a lot of Photoshop, and not many people know when something is real or when something is edited. I know a lot of the times I see images of like women, for example, that their like proportions are just like way off, and it's like it might not be Photoshop, but it could be surgery. And I think like the youth of today are probably comparing themselves to those women, and thinking like, oh, why aren't my hips as wide as hers, or why isn't my nose like as snatched as hers either? And then they start like doubting their own self-image, and they get into these unhealthy eating habits in order to look like these women as well. So I think it's just like all of the Photoshop and the surgery that's out there that makes the youth of today probably feel insecure.
Yeah, totally. That insecure is a real thing, and social media, I agree, definitely plays a big role in that. So let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. So looking at perfectionism, right, and control, many individuals with eating disorders exhibit perfectionistic tendencies and a desire for control. The strict rules and rituals surrounding food and body shape provide a sense of control in their lives, but ultimately contribute to the cycle of disordered eating. And this kind of goes back to that person at that table, right? Thinking about those strict rules and understanding that they have to try to find a way to stick to that rule or stick to, the desire of wanting to maintain the weight or maintain the perception that they may have of not wanting to get out of shape or not wanting to gain too much weight. It's certainly something that, can contribute to, a mental space where a person is just so rigid and trying to maintain this perception of having to do certain behaviors that ultimately are a bit disillusioned. They are actually really thin, but they believe that they're actually overweight. So all of these things play a role in terms of perfection and control. So let's go ahead and move on to our next slide. Now, when we talk about who's affected, right, looking at our subgroups, who might be more susceptible to eating disorders? And I'll open it up. I know we have our slide here, but I want to open it up to some of our youth that are here. Sophia, you're in high school. I'm curious to know who might be susceptible to engaging in certain types of eating disorders.
I feel like people who are definitely in like groups like that have workouts and then like sports, I feel like they're more prone to eating disorders because they feel like they have to like because sometimes they run, let's just say they run around the track and they're like the last one, and then it's really they're really more prone to eating disorders, especially if their classmates are telling them, oh, your body shape looks like this, because they don't fit into like the type of, like, their body isn't what's expected for the sport. And so that this just makes them really more prone to eating disorders just like that, because then they feel like to fit in with the group, I have to, do this, I have to not eat anymore. And yeah.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I actually didn't really think about that, but you're absolutely right. Certain athletes or folks who are engaged in different physical competitive activities, may want to look like their counterparts, which psychologically can have an impact on them, right? So it's certainly something to think about. Now, Michael, I want to pivot to you because you're a young man on our call, and we want to ask about the research, because we know the research is showing that more young men are also exhibiting eating disorders. So can you talk to me about why that might be happening?
Yeah, I think it ties into what you were talking about earlier, how the young men tend to want to build up the muscular physique. And I feel like that's real prevalent around my age, kids in high school, because, it's social media. You see it on social media. You see, these athletes and how they look, or just people, males in general, influencers, everything on social media. It's all to like, show your best. You put your best foot forward. And so you see, these people, and as a young person, you're like, okay, like, like that's what girls like, type of thing. So it can put a lot of pressure on a young man to feel like that's what you got to do in order to get to where you want to be, not even just in a sense of a relationship, but to just feel like you are a man. Sometimes you feel like, that's part of it, the body is part of it.
Wow. Yeah, you bring up a really good point. Just the aspect of being a young man and what that means in terms of that definition. And, definitely the way in which you look, the way in which you present yourself has a big part of your identity. And I feel that a lot of young men who want to affirm their identity may do certain behaviors to make sure they appear to be more masculine and so on and so forth, following a lot of the tropes and a lot of the narratives that we as a society have deemed of what it means to be quote unquote a man. So totally a great point. So I appreciate that feedback. Thank you. So, as we're talking about who might be affected, research actually suggests that many LGBTQ plus youth may be at a higher risk of developing eating disorders as well. And this can come about from stress, from discrimination, as well as body image concerns. Other groups, such as individuals who engage in sports, which we talked about a little bit earlier, those folks who really emphasize on their weight and their appearance, activities like gymnastics, dance, wrestling, all of which can increase the risk of eating disorders among young athletes. Additionally, eating disorders are often underdiagnosed and overlooked in youth of color due to cultural stereotypes and a lack of representation in clinical settings. So, that really kind of raises my antennas a little bit when we talk about youth of color having the cultural stereotypes as well as a lack of representation in the clinical setting. And I want to ask our clinician, Christian, can you talk to us a little bit about that with regard to lack of representation and different cultural stereotypes?
Well, I think the first part, I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about culture, because, we talk about, black and brown men and women, boys and girls, it starts with food, right? And so, for example, and culturally, it's a lot of Hispanic cultures, it's very acceptable to call someone gordo or gorda. You hear that a lot. It could be almost like a nickname, but some people may see that as offensive, but it's a cultural thing, right? Or, for example, in the African American culture, you see if you go down south or certain places, if you're any way or fit or even thin, they'll say you're too skinny. You need to put on some weight. Let's feed you, right? You need some more food. You looks like, are you sick? Are you okay? Like, no, I'm healthy. I'm in shape. So those are some of the cultural stigmas that we have. So, and then you deal with the actual food itself that may be, for example, nutritional wise, higher carbohydrates for corn or tortillas or potatoes. That's just something you have to consider. So culturally, and food, how does that look? And then stigma. Actually being able to admit there's an issue. So we combine those things. The number one thing is really trying to find out how we can interrupt some of those stigmas and break those stigmas by educating ourselves. It's something else is eating disorders in boys. It's easier to hide, and it's more acceptable because you see muscle, and for girls you may see it's more obvious because they're thin. So these are some of the myths that we have to kind of look past and try and break through in terms of those cultural barriers.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. And just on that aspect of culture, I know that I could totally agree with you when you say, you might be in shape, but some folks are like, what do you mean? Like, you need to put some more meat on your bones. I've heard that countless times growing up because I always was thin, but I would have family members telling me, you're too light. You need to put some more meat on the bones. And also the financial aspect of making sure you clean your plate. Whenever food is presented to you, you make sure you eat all of your food. And that's almost something that, I feel is a cultural thing as well. And if there's more food here, let me give you more food and heap more food on your plate, when oftentimes you could be overeating. So, so many aspects that go into the culture as well. And then when we talk about representation, there's not too many, clinicians that youth of color feel that they may have a relationship or cultural competency with, which is why we're grateful to have you here, Christian, because I'm sure there are a lot of youth of color that may be in our audience right now that may, want to have someone like you to talk to about some of the challenges that they're facing. So many different things to, consider as it relates to eating disorders. So now let's move along to our next slide, because we want to talk about beauty standards, right? Like, who made this stuff up, right? There is an internalized beauty standard, and it really goes into how a person determines what society considers beautiful, and this will have an impact on the way that they view themselves. Now, it's important to note that society's, ideals of beauty and body image and thinness can vary across many different cultures. Individuals might internalize these ideals differently. So, for example, in Western cultures, thinness is often associated with beauty and with fitness, while in other cultures, a larger body size might be considered more desirable. So many different cultural factors come to play, such as family dynamics, cultural norms, as well as media influence, which can all have an impact on an individual's relationship with food and their own body image. Now, let's move on to our next slide. Now, one might ask, where do schools fall in all of this, right? Schools actually play a significant role. They can create a supportive and inclusive environment by promoting body positivity, by providing education on healthy eating habits, and also by offering counseling services to students who may need to reach out to a counselor. Additionally, schools can collaborate with healthcare professionals and community organizations to provide comprehensive support for students with eating disorders. Now let's move along to our next slide. And we want to talk about nutrition. However, when we talk about nutritional deficiencies, we have to take into consideration what that means. So an insufficient intake of essential nutrients can lead to various physical health complications, including electrolyte imbalances, weakened immune system, osteoporosis, and hormonal disruptions. Now, Christian, I'd like to ask you, can you tell me what can happen to a young person who isn't getting the necessary nutrients that they may need?
This is the scary part about, the condition is that it affects the whole body. So for anorexic, anyone who has anorexia, the brain and the nerves, so the bad memory, the fainting, it affects your hair, your, dry, brittle hair. So as you're trying to become more beautiful, here you are, your hair is falling out, your heart, so low blood pressure, slow heart rate, and through your blood, you become anemic because you're not receiving the iron that you need from certain food. Muscles and bones, right? So your muscles can become weak, swollen joints, and more fractures and osteoporosis because your bones are weaker. Kidney stones because your body is working overtime. Bodily fluids as well because you have low potassium, magnesium, and sodium. So it's throwing everything off, and not to mention for a lot of women too, hormones. So it'll significantly impact your menstrual cycle, or sometimes some women don't, they lose their menstrual cycle or having problems getting pregnant. And then your skin as well, it can damage your skin where you have like blots and dark spots. And, for in bulimia, it's kind of the same thing, but there's more physical things. So like your teeth, teeth rotting, because as you throw up, the acid in your stomach affect your gums and your teeth. So you have, so that can really affect that area. So there's just so many things that can affect physically within your body.
Wow, thanks a lot for that, Christian. And that, leads us to our next slide, talking about approaches to healthy eating. So individuals can work with healthcare professionals such as registered dietitians to develop a balanced and individualized meal plan. Learning about proper nutrition, intuitive eating, and practicing mindful eating can all help to have an individual establish a healthy relationship with their food and maintain their physical and mental well-being. Now let's move along to our next slide. Now, when we talk about clinical support for eating disorders, there are clinical solutions that may include therapy, such as cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, which can help individuals challenge those negative thoughts and develop healthy coping strategies. There's medical monitoring and nutritional counseling available as well that can also be necessary to restore a person to their healthy physical health. Moving on to our next slide. Now before we get into some of the holistic healing solutions, I just want to put it out there that there are so many, right? So when we talk about these healing solutions and these healing approaches, these can include mindfulness, yoga, art therapy, healing circles, different peer support groups. Holistic healing also focuses on addressing the underlying emotional and psychological factors that contribute to this disordered eating behaviors and can overall help a person promote their well-being. So, with that, we've learned a lot today about eating disorders. I want to thank each and every one of you for providing your input. Thank you, Sophia, for your feedback. Thank you, Erica. I want to thank you, Monica, and thank you, Michael, for always being stellar contributors to our conversation. And a huge thank you to Christian Jacobs just for bringing that insight and that analysis. Also, I'd like to thank you, our audience, for joining Into the Classroom, which is a production of Mental Health California. Please be sure to visit us at mentalhealthca.org. And to access health and mental wellness topics for boys and men of color, please visit our signature initiative at brotherbewell.com. And also be sure to subscribe to our blog. And lastly, but definitely not least, we want to give a huge thank you to our sponsor, Blue Shield of California's Blue Sky Initiative, which promotes access to mental health support. You can learn all about their program at bluesky.blueshieldca.com. And with that, I'm your host, Conrad Crump, aka Coach Crump. And until next time, take good care of yourselves.